It's really hard at this point to imagine a world before the internet, but trust me, it existed. And if you were a teenager in Santa Fe, New Mexico, obsessed with a sound that was exploding 1,000 miles away, your world probably felt incredibly small. Back then, the radio was playing something else entirely, whether you were in New Mexico or here in Australia like I am. If you were like me, the local record stores had nothing you really wanted. It was really hard to find your niche. Being a fan of underground metal and hardcore often meant you had to be like an archaeologist, digging through treasure troves of backorder mail catalogs and photocopied designs. It was incredibly difficult to find your type of music. So what happens when a fan who's totally cut off from the scene he loves decides to almost build his own scene for himself from his bedroom? This is the story of how a scrappy do-it-yourself mail order grew into Hydra Head Records, one of the most important and, dare I say, influential labels in modern metal. How being isolated can spark something amazing, and how one person's uncompromising vision can change a genre forever. Hey everyone, my name's Anthony, this is My Kinda Weird, and today we're getting into the story of how Hydra Head Records and its founder, Aaron Turner, created Hydra Head Records from its humble beginnings to the point where it was a huge force in underground metal and hardcore, to eventually closing its doors. Now let's set the scene. It's 1993 in cities like New York and Boston. The underground is this beautiful, chaotic mess. Hardcore, punk, and heavy metal are mutating into aggressive and experimental new forms. But for a teenage Aaron Turner living in Santa Fe, New Mexico, all that energy was just a distant rumor. It felt worlds away. Turner was obsessed with the sounds he was reading about in magazines, but he was stuck in New Mexico, feeling totally disconnected. The problem was access. His solution, if the scene wasn't going to come to him, he'd build a pipeline to it. In 1993, while he was still in high school, Turner started what would eventually become Hydra Head Records. But it didn't even start as a record label. It was a mail-order distro run entirely out of his bedroom. He saw an ad for a label called Evolution Records, offering to sell their releases wholesale, and on a whim, he went for it. He'd buy records in bulk from groundbreaking indie labels and then sell them to anyone he could find locally and to a growing list of mail-order customers. We're talking pre-e-commerce here. There was no real internet, cash was stuffed in envelopes, a system running on trust, all held together by word of mouth and the web of fanzines. Now, this little operation wasn't just a business, it was a lifeline. It was how Turner got his hands on the music he desperately wanted to hear and shared it with others who were just as starved for hearing it. He was taking his first step from just being a fan into becoming a full-fledged participant in the music industry. So he wasn't just consuming music anymore, he was becoming part of the network that kept music very much alive. He even used the name Hydra Head for a couple of local shows he put on. A foundation was being built one record at a time, and he was laying the groundwork for the ultimate success. Now, it was 1995 that things really kicked into gear for him. Turner moved from the high desert to the dense streets of Boston to attend art school, and this move changed everything for him. Suddenly, he was dropped right into the middle of one of the most fertile and aggressive music scenes in the country. The abstract scene, as he conceived it, that he was chasing for and longing for, was suddenly just right next door. He started meeting people who would eventually become the foundation of the label. Guys like Jake Bannon from Converge, and the members of Cave-In. But at this point, you're probably thinking to yourself, how does a distro become a label? Well, it wasn't some grand business plan that he had in mind. It was more like a mail order, which felt like the natural next step. The whole thing started with a demo tape from a band called Vent. Turner had met them promoting shows back in Santa Fe, and their raw sound just naturally clicked with him. So he decided to put out a record. That first release, a 7-inch single by Vent called Long Lost Human, came out in the fall of 1995 with the catalogue number HH666-01. The release was as DIY as you could get. Boxes of vinyl showed up at his house, and he started shipping them out to Zines and other distros, using the very network he'd helped build. And just like that, Hydra Head Records was born. It wasn't a company, it was just an extension of his passion. The early releases were from bands in his immediate circle, friends and local acts like Corin, Highbald, and Roswell. This cemented the label's identity from day one. It was personal, community-focused, and built on handshake agreements and shared passions, not profit margins or contracts. Turner was creating an outlet for the music that he and his friends loved, putting artistic integrity above everything else. Now, by the time Turner had graduated from art school in 1999, Hydra Head had become his full-time focus. The label was growing, and around 1998 or 99, he started bringing in help, realizing he couldn't do it all by himself if he wanted to do right by the artists he was looking after. But you gotta really ask yourself, what really made Hydra Head stand out? Well, it was really the vibe of Hydra Head, the whole aesthetic. Turner's background as an artist was baked into the label's DNA, and you can see that with a lot of releases. You weren't just buying music, you were buying a piece of art. The album covers were just as important as the songs inside, creating a strong visual identity that was dark, atmospheric, and beautifully crafted. A Hydra Head release just looked like a Hydra Head release. For me, it was about the mystery of a Hydra Head release. What would what I had just purchased sound like when there were so many zines, magazines, even early iterations of websites that weren't really talking about this label, and it was this mystery aspect that really made it for myself. But it's by the time it got to someone like myself in Australia that the roster really started to look legendary. The label signed a lot of bands that would become titans of metalcore, sludge, and post-hardcore and metal, including Cave-In, whose album Until the Heart Stops became an absolute landmark. And the chaotic, brilliant Botch and Converge. Botch being a huge centerpiece in math metal, math rock. And Converge being very much like the forefathers of what post-hardcore would eventually become. Now, despite the difference in their musical styles, these weren't random signings. They were bands that embodied the label's ethos around releasing challenging, creative, and artistically fearless music. The Hydra Head logo became a seal of approval. If the band was on Hydra Head, you knew it would be interesting. It might be dissonant or ugly, it might be crushingly heavy, or it might be sprawling and atmospheric. That was the beauty of a Hydra Head release. The one thing it would never be was generic. If you go through their entire catalogue, you won't find any generic bands. This was the label that put out records by acts as different as the experimental hip-hop of Dalek, post-metal giants of Pelican. And the Japanese drone legends Boris earlier on in their career. It was a home for artists who just didn't really fit anywhere else. And that's why people like myself really loved everything Hydra Head was about. Look, running an independent record label, especially one that champions difficult art, is, I'm going to assume at least, is a grind. For every classic album and sold-out show, there's obviously huge challenges. The trials for Hydra Head were exactly what you'd come to expect: money problems, distribution nightmares, and the simple crushing weight of being a small art-first community and business. Unfortunately, when Turner announced the label was winding down in 2012, he was brutally honest about the reasons, citing years of imbalance between creative ideals and financial difficulties. The very thing that made Hydra Head so special is its refusal to compromise, which was also what made it so hard and difficult to sustain. At one point, the label was putting out so much music that releases got delayed simply because they didn't really have the cash flow to manufacture them. But Turner wasn't doing this alone. The label's allies were its backbone. It fostered a real community among its bands, and of the many artists who were directly in the label's production and day-to-day work. It also collaborated with other indie labels, creating a web of mutual support. In 2003, Turner relocated the whole operation from Boston to LA, but the same challenges followed. The music industry was changing, and it was hitting indie labels hard. The enemy wasn't necessarily another label, it wasn't that competition aesthetic, it was the industry itself, an industry that so often rewards safe choices over bold art. Yet for nearly 2 decades, Hydra Head fought that battle, and by any artistic measure, it absolutely won. By 2012, after almost 20 years, Turner made the tough call to call it a day and wind down Hydra Head. The plan was to stop putting out new music and focus on selling the incredible back catalogue to pay off its debts. In a final move that perfectly summed up the label's ethos, they officially closed up shop in 2020 by returning the master recordings to the artists themselves, which is fundamentally Aaron Turner and Hydra Head Records. Thankfully, though, a label like Hydra Head doesn't really disappear. The legacy of Hydra Head is just how massive its influence is. For a whole generation of fans and musicians, Hydra Head wasn't just a record company, it was an education. It was a gateway to a world of music that was smart, daring, and ultimately really powerful. The label itself is credited with basically defining the cutting edge of metal and hardcore, putting out nearly 300 releases that never failed to challenge anyone. Bands like Botch, Cave In, Isis, and even Pelican didn't just release albums on Hydra Head, they built entire subgenres on the foundation it gave them. Its commitment to quality, from the music to the visuals, set a new standard for what an indie label could ultimately be. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I feel like you can still hear Hydra Head's influence everywhere today, in the dissonant sounds of modern metalcore, the patient epics of post-metal bands, and ultimately to the adventurous spirit of countless indie labels that followed in their footsteps. And to think it all started just because one teenager in a desert town felt cut off from the world and a world he wanted to ultimately join is really quite powerful and inspiring. Instead of waiting for an invitation, Aaron Turner built his own door. He started this journey with Hydra Head, and that journey is the ultimate testament to the DIY spirit, a reminder that sometimes the most influential movements begin with a simple refusal to accept the world, and in this case, the music world, as it is. So yeah, if this got you fired up, if you're an indie artist, if you're an indie musician, and the story of Hydra Head Records really capitalizes on the indie artist journey, then by all means leave a comment with your story, or if you have any Hydra Head recordings or Hydra Head band stories, leave them in the notes as well. What I think's really incredible is not only the journey of Hydra Head recordings, how it was started at such a fundamentally innocent level and built to what it was, to handing the masters of those recordings back to the band so that they could reissue them on their own dime and make money from that dime. It really is a testament to just how far you can do when you don't sacrifice for money aspect, for profit margin aspect, but are more true to what your core beliefs are. But yeah, that's just what I thought on Hydra Head Records. Leave a like and subscribe if you've enjoyed this video. But for now, my name's Anthony from My Kinda Weird, and you'll see me in the next episode.